Have you ever just looked around the world and wondered, why are some countries so incredibly wealthy while others seem to be stuck, just struggling to get by? Well, today we are unpacking the huge, powerful ideas that try to answer that exact question. Let's dive in.
It really is the fundamental puzzle of global economics, isn't it? That gap between the rich and the poor? It's the big question that some of the greatest minds in history, from Adam Smith all the way to Karl Marx, have been trying to crack for centuries.
So, to really get our heads around all these clashing ideas, we have to go back to the very beginning. We need to start with the classical foundation. This was kind of the original blueprint for how economists thought nations could grow rich.
And the chief architect of that blueprint? That would be Adam Smith. For him, economic growth wasn't some kind of sudden big bang. Nope, it was a slow, steady, step-by-step process. So what was the engine driving it? It really boiled down to two key things. First, the division of labor, basically people specializing and getting really good at one thing. And second, and this is absolutely crucial, you had to encourage capital accumulation. You got to invest money to make money. Simple as that.
Now, the one core belief behind everything Smith talked about was this idea of laissez-faire. It's a French term that basically means let it be, or hands off. The idea is that there should be zero government intervention. Smith believed that an invisible hand, the natural forces of supply and demand, would guide the economy way better than any government ever could.
But it wasn't all sunshine and roses in classical economics. Another thinker, David Ricardo, came along and threw a bit of a wrench in the works. He posed a pretty scary question. What happens when your population keeps getting bigger and bigger, but the amount of land you have stays the same? Well, he came up with the law of diminishing returns. He predicted that profits would eventually just fall and fall until they hit zero, leading to what he called a stationary phase, a total dead end for economic growth.
So this classical framework really set the stage for some pretty epic intellectual battles. And now we're going to explore three of those great debates. These are the clashing ideas that challenged everything and asked, how does development really happen?
So the first huge debate is about what growth even is. Is it the slow and steady process that the classical guys talked about? Or is it big, messy, and disruptive? The economist Joseph Schumpeter came along and said, nope, you've all got it wrong. He argued that real growth, real development, only happens through these big, spontaneous shocks that just shake up the whole system.
For Schumpeter, the magic word, the key to everything, was innovation. He said that real development only happens when you disturb the regular flow of the economy with something new, a new product, a new way of making things, a new market. And these things don't just trickle in, oh no. He said they appear in swarm-like clusters, creating these massive waves of change and progress.
Okay, now let's switch gears and look through a completely different lens. Karl Marx. Well, he didn't want to just adjust the classical model. He wanted to tear the whole thing down. In his view, capitalism wasn't a system of peaceful cooperation. It was a system of constant, built-in conflict between two groups: the capitalists, the owners, also known as the bourgeoisie, and the working class, the proletariat.
For Marx, the whole system was just fundamentally built on exploitation. He even came up with a formula for it: the rate of surplus value, which was his way of measuring the value that workers create that they don't get paid for. And because of this built-in conflict, he predicted that capitalism was basically doomed. It would eventually destroy itself from the inside out.
All right, so we've had these grand, sweeping theories. Let's bring it down to a really practical problem, which brings us to our third great debate. If you are trying to kickstart a developing economy, where on earth do you put your money first?
And on this question, economists were totally split. On one side, you had the balanced growth theory. These guys saw a vicious circle of poverty and said the only way to break it is with a massive, coordinated investment, a big push across tons of industries all at once. But then you had Albert Hirschman, who argued for the exact opposite: unbalanced growth. He said you should actually use a deliberate imbalance to tip the scales and create some real momentum.
And Hirschman's idea here was pretty clever. He saw two ways to do it. Path 1, you invest in what he called social overhead capital. First, things like roads, power plants, ports, the stuff everyone needs. This makes it way cheaper and easier for private companies to jump in. Or you could try Path 2, invest in directly productive activities, like factories. This creates bottlenecks and shortages, which then puts a ton of pressure on the government to go and build the roads and power plants you need. It's like you're creating a problem on purpose to force a solution. Pretty smart.
All right, so we've debated the how of investment. Now let's talk about the what. What does this transformation from a poor country to a developed one actually look like on the ground? This is the classic farm-to-factory story. And the most famous version of this story is definitely the Lewis model. It says you should picture an economy that's split in two. You've got the traditional farm sector with tons of extra workers who aren't really producing much. And then you have the modern industrial sector. Development happens when you start moving that surplus labor from the farms into the new factories. Those factories make profits, reinvest them to build more factories, which then pulls even more people from the farms. It's a cycle of growth.
It sounds perfect, right? It's so elegant, and it was incredibly influential. It just makes sense. But there was a huge blind spot, a massive flaw in this model. What was the one crucial thing that Lewis completely overlooked?
The flaw? He basically forgot about the farms. The Feyranis model came along and provided a super important correction. They argued that, hold on a second, you can't just drain the countryside of all its workers without also making the farms more productive. Agricultural growth is just as important as industrial growth. If you don't grow more food, you risk falling into a horrible poverty trap where the population outgrows the food supply. A total nightmare.
Okay, wow. We have covered a ton of ground, from the classical founders to modern-day strategists. So let's just take a breath, step back, and try to map out how all these competing ideas actually fit together.
And this map really lays out the whole landscape beautifully. You start with the classical view of Smith and Ricardo, totally focused on capital. Then you've got the big challengers, Marx with his class struggle, and Schumpeter with his constant innovation. Then you have the big strategy debates, balance versus unbalanced growth. And finally, you have the structural story of how you go from the farm to the factory.
So what's the bottom line here? It's that there really is no single right answer. None of these theories are 100% right or 100% wrong. The best way to think about them is as different lenses, or maybe different tools in a toolkit that help us look at one of the most complicated problems in the entire world.
So I'll leave you with this big question. When you look at the world right now, with its tech giants, its crazy supply chains, and all the inequality we still see, which of these powerful ideas do you think matters most today? Is it all about innovation? Is it still about good old-fashioned capital? Is class conflict more relevant than ever? Or is it about finding that one clever investment strategy? The debate, as you can see, is far from over.